Are spies real? I mean, probably not, is the short answer. Not the ones who sleuth around thwarting our protagonist at every turn. Those are works of fiction. Character development in real life isn't so straightforward. Real people do not rise to power off the coattails of desperation and manipulation. CIA directors can't be strictly psychos that want to be corrupted and do evil shit. That would be conspiracy. It's just entertainment, and nothing grabs the attention better than playing with this idea of shadow people with mysterious intentions. But the problem with these spy and intelligence archetypes is that they're simplified and never really explain the motivation for subverting social order in the first place. Maybe everyone is out to get you, but why would they want to do that? In this video, I would like to add some complexity to these simplified representations. From the thumbnail, you would have seen that there is a more philosophical label for these spy-like people called strategic cynics. Their strategicness should be obvious as the trickster, deception type, but their cynicism may not be as apparent. That comes from a need for these sleuthers to do their evildoer stuff themselves, because society is inept and largely incapable of bringing the change they want. It would be very hard, for example, to democratically stabilize a problem like overpopulation, even if you have little finger jewels. But okay, so believing that society and politics and these structures in our world are useless is a trait amongst strategic cynics, but of course it is not exclusive to them. There will always be an ever-present mutual distrust between strangers, and so everyone has this more or less cynical attitude in one way or another. As Peter Osborne writes it, from a historical perspective, the question is not whether to be cynical or how to avoid cynicism, but how best to be cynical. In what mode and in what relation to politics especially. Cynicism is then all around us, and the task here is to take these spy types to their logical and often sordid limits. Is there any morsel to learn from strategic cynics in real life and real circumstance, or are they better off left as an entertaining fantasy and in conspiracy? Let's take a look. So, real strategic cynics would find it necessary to keep up their appearances. Leaving a good impression is probably a good skill to have. Taking that to the far extremes of pretending to believe one thing to gain trust with others as if people are merely social credit is a more questionable skill to have. Their behavior would pay lip service to the conventional values and moralities of the ruled. They keep up appearances by saying and doing whatever gives them the greatest advantage. This uses the understanding that you can't just force people to do whatever you want. No, the better strategy, if you will, is to play nice and to play slow. Gain some favor here, make some friends there, until you have enough control to undermine the man and beat them at their own game. As a spy, this would look like backstabbing your king, or suppressing dissenting opinions and silencing revolts. But the takeaway in the form of the closest, more practical equivalent is an academic or an idealist who make political concessions for the sake of personal agendas. Politicians are not spies, I think. Conspiracy, no, they are strategic cynics and thematically employ similar tactics. Concessions are a good thing sometimes, it's called compromise. Thank you. The weapons in this sense are not daggers and kidnapping, but rhetoric and well-timed arguments. They act as a vehicle for the self-deluding, self-ennobling dream of the university academic, who is forever strategic in their interventions, arguing that it is necessary and prudent to consort with government and other influential agencies, in the hope that such careful maneuvering will help loosen, though not break, the reins of power. The reins of power is the goal, not through force, but a strategy that can be considered one part compromising, if not also one part underhanded. And then the more manipulative their words, the bendier and more compromised the general opinion becomes. This strategic style of communication allows its user to assert their influence. But the cost of being convincing is that they represent themselves in the most outwardly likable and often dishonest way possible. Psychiatrist Ronald Lang separated this into an inner true self and an outer false self. which arises in compliance with the wishes and expectations of the other. A man's social facade, like the ritual language he employs, becomes stereotyped, characterized by a compulsive excessiveness and hypercompliance, which turns his behavior into a bitter satire on the persons he hates and fears. A good strategic cynic will copy successful people and powerful people. If these people are corrupted and unusual, the strategic cynic will also be corrupted and unusual. People might naturally assimilate to their environment, but this situation is a looking the part only in order to harness those reins of power. And if you've been loving this, let's dive off the deep end. So far, the MO is to hate the world, have a dream to fix it, for better or worse, then play political games to have a front-facing personality to satisfy the world you hate, while still secretly believing in the dream that upends it. This whole process is about control. It is not had in its inception, that being control, but through this process it can be obtained. In other words, the process of the strategic cynic for both the spy and their practical and complex equivalents like the academic is a conquest of virtue, a spreading of beliefs. This perspective will then be framed in Nietzsche's will to power. Very simply, the will to power is the unconscious need for all life really to populate itself into the environment. It explains why countries conquer countries, trying to take up land and prove superior, as well as why you just can't help but input your thoughts into a conversation, especially if you don't exactly know what's going on. Psychologically, we want our beliefs to be the beliefs of others, and especially we want to be heard. Biologically, we want our genes to be your genes and everyone else's genes. Spread the bread. We want to spread what we know into what is. The spy then sculpts their reality based on their own will and sense of virtue, and does so to the detriment of existing senses and existing virtues. If two people do not have the same morals, one of them must then be immoral and must be destroyed. This means that in order to obtain the highest of values, says the strategic cynic and their speaker of the house Nietzsche, you must employ the lowest of values, that being the cruel decimation of your environment to pave the way for ethics. Which is where you may notice a problem. As Nietzsche puts it, a great moralist is, among other things, necessarily a great actor. They must dominate and crush and purify the current order to create the utopian peace and calm and welcoming world that is envisioned. Can you name a time when people tried purifying foreign lands? That's the will of power, baby. And if we go one level deeper, we can track many of these ideas back to Plato's purity of form. Plato's philosophy is all about decay and that everything gets worse over time, making an original idea of, say, utopia, the more pure and superior. The whole perspective requires our strategic cynic then to find greatness in their original ideas, to spread those ideas, and to undermine their shitty reality to employ those ideas. The emphasis is on the cynic's brilliant theories and, frankly, the strength of their ego. They want to use their pure thought to make new what has become decrepit and run down, that being society. Plato, that rascally devil, used his philosophy to rationalize a sovereign composure that seeks to regulate and form the body in the name of a higher calling. The body is gross and messy and corporeal. The mind is pure and logical and ascended. Apply this to the strategic cynic and spies, the rascally devils, and they want to regulate and form society in the name of their more idealistic morals and values. Regulating society, to fit our need as sovereign thinkers, is just a liberal society. Liberal in that one sense, meaning free, critical thinking, openness to change, etc., etc., etc. And we are so back. This liberal society gets us again to the academics, the real-life spy equivalents, who smartly put on appearances to change customs. Political academics might best idealize society as solely filled with learned people, who are all active contributors. Society should be continually sculpted into its moral and structural apex, allowing it to ascend to its ideal state, or whatever Plato said. This reality, similar to something like Plato's guardian class, could spawn from academic wishes for better education. More education creates more critical, and thus like-minded, individuals capable of their own convincing rhetoric. It is a slower and more designed integration of power. Progressive educationalists are then claiming that education is, at core, naturally good, if it is freed from the shackles of didactic teaching and paternalism, which would mean to substitute traditional lecture with more active and critical learning, which in turn is the origin of the positive but duplicitous cynicism of educators who respond to the traumas of modernity by perpetuating a belief of educational redemption. Holy shit. The world could be saved if we make everyone learn to communicate effectively, but right now it's bad, so we'll stay cynical. The goal of the reformation of education is to create two-faced thinkers as an antidote to the vernacularized mass cynicism. Stupidity and hopelessness is the result of this mass cynicism. Strategic cynicism is good because it identifies education as a means to acquire intense political upheaval. This modern mass cynicism is approached as a personal and interpersonal epidemic that requires extended treatment, where people can at once be trained to think for themselves. In this sense, our strategic and academic cynics are cynical towards mass cynicism. They are a cynic's cynic. Jesus. A strategic cynic looks to solve the apathy and eyes glazed over effect of the world, but they incorporate their beliefs through subversion and deceit. They are very spy-like and rely on the ideals of superior freedom and purity of thought to overcome the ignorant and the ignoble. Is that the best way to be cynical? Is it worse than normal cynicism? Like the name brand Spies, the political game tends to open up a dangerous can of worms, which requires the most expert of fisher dudes. Okay, thanks, bye.